I'm my photograph or this little camera here goes off and on. So if you just see my name, I'm still there.
Yeah, we are not worried at all.
Okay, good.
So,
I didn't want to be rude.
no, all is well. All is well. Thank
Uh,
you. Thanks for being here.
We're live.
Well, welcome everyone. Bienvenidos, bonjour, and it is just such a joy to have you here on Cultivating Voices live poetry as we emerge from winter here in the Northern Hemisphere, on the cusp of spring, as I like to say. And you're joining us here live today for our new books showcase as we continue to celebrate Women's History Month. And a special shout out tonight, I'll say tonight, for those of you in Ireland who have been celebrating Mother's Day. I am your host, Sandra Yannone. I'm the author of Boats for Women from Salmon Poetry. Let me take my sticky note off the cover. And thank you for joining me today from my trusty little room here in Old Saybrook, Connecticut, with a welcome to all of you joining us live in our Zoom poetry studio and those watching live on Facebook and YouTube. And of course, to those of you who watch on video later, we so appreciate you checking our recordings out. Well, today it's my absolute pleasure to welcome four poets whose books have emerged at different time periods during the pandemic. We welcome today Lucy Adkins, Ellen Stone, Michael Durack, and Sandra Ann Winters. Well, before I introduce today's first poet, a little bit about Cultivating Voices live poetry. We held our first reading on March 29th, 2020, in response to the shutdowns of in-person venues everywhere. And we have spent the year developing into an international, intersectional, intergenerational reading series and poetry community, now with over 2,400 members worldwide. We alternate weekly readings between our ever popular new books showcase, like today, and a live open mic with featured poets, which will be next week. We occasionally have a special event, like our upcoming Sunday special, actually next week for World Poetry Day. Next Sunday lands conveniently on World Poetry Day. Well, more about that at the end of today's showcase reading. Well, now to today's poets. I will introduce each before they read and then return with a few announcements at the end of the reading. First, joining us today is Lucy Adkins. And I am heading over to my bios. I don't know where they went. Let me grab them. Yeah, this is why it's called live. Here we go. Lucy Adkins her poetry has been published in many journals, including Poet Lore, Red Wheelbarrow, South Dakota Review, and the anthologies Nebraska Presence, Women Right Resistance, and the Poets Against the War anthology. She also co-authored 2 books of nonfiction. We were just talking about this book a little earlier today. It is a phenomenal book of writing pedagogy. I can't recommend it enough, called Writing in Community. And her upcoming book, The Fire Inside, which will be forthcoming this June. Her newly released book that we are showcasing today is Two-Toned Dress, which is winner of the 2019 Blue Light Press Chapbook Contest. And I couldn't be happier than to welcome someone from Lincoln, Nebraska, a place that Kim Ports Parson and I know all too well. Thank you so much, Lucy.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here and to be among people who are uh, writing poetry, reading poetry, loving poetry. And I'm glad to I'm glad to share my book, a few readings from Two Tone Dress. So I'm going to start by just letting you know that many of the poems that I read today, or some of them anyway, will be are influenced by my upbringing, as perhaps most of us are. I grew up on a small farm in Nebraska, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So I'm going to start the reading with the title poem, where Two Tone Dress came from. It's the title of the poem is Old Photograph of My Mother, and it's from an old photograph. She is wearing a short sleeved two-tone dress and is standing on a bridge. It's a black and white photo, so I don't know the color of her dress, though I imagine it in two shades of blue. One hand grasps her arm behind her back, and she seems tentative, beautiful as she is, her slight figure, her dress, the long dark curl of her hair. She would be married in a month. And maybe her shyness is due to that. Or maybe it's because the bridge that she's standing on ends halfway across the river. It's the loop, she told me once, that July of the flood, when the rains wouldn't stop, the soil turned liquid, and it all ran into the river. Her father is there in his suit and hat, her mother demure in her Sunday dress. My mother stands a little apart from them, not far from where the planks end, while beyond that is the river at flood stage, swirling in eddies of corn stalks and fence posts, snags and broken boards, and below the water line, all the splintered danger she couldn't see. Thank you. The next poem is called Before the Vows, and it's written from the point of view of my mother before she got married. It's a little bit of my mother before she got married, a little bit about what it was like for women of that generation, a little bit of what it was like for me when I first got married, which is still a pretty, not the current generation, still a few generations back. This is called Before the Vows. She would make a list of what she would and would not do. Cooking was fine, jelly making, but no canning green beans, no peaches in a jar. Occasional cobwebs were acceptable, dust bunnies, but no spiders in the house, no roaches. That was before Alabama. And she would do her hair and makeup, wear something nice when he came home. She read a book about that once, written by a man, a preacher, some family first guy who told the story about visiting a parishioner, a housewife, who, coming on 4 in the afternoon, told him he had to go. She needed to get ready for her husband coming home. Pretty up. He wrote about how he admired that, how that was the way it should be. He went on to write some other things about lingerie and how a woman should position her body, lean over when dressing or undressing. She supposed he thought you shouldn't hide under a bushel, not your peaches anyway. She wouldn't go that far, and she would drive. Of course she would drive, but she thought the man's job came first. That was the way things were, and there was a line. She'd live close to that, and only once in a while step over. Thank you. This next poem I wrote when I was on, I live in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I was on my way to a writing retreat in Brownville, Nebraska, not very far, an hour and a half. I was listening to, it was Sunday afternoon, I was listening to NPR, and there was a segment on about R.A. Dickey. I don't know if you've heard of R.A. Dickey. He's a baseball player, and he had written a memoir, and he talked about in the memoir about trying to swim across the Missouri River from Omaha to Iowa on the other side. And that made me think about a few things. And when I got to the retreat, this is the poem I wrote. It's called To the Other Side. Like R.A. Dickey, the great knuckleball pitcher in the making, the time he decided to swim across the Missouri from Omaha to Iowa, not knowing the treachery of the water, how dirty it was, the undertows and whirlpools, how he made it partway across and realizing his danger, turned back, struggling, half drowning, his muscles expanding and contracting, then losing power like an engine wearing out. And if not for his will and the teammate waiting on the shore, the shortstop reaching out to reel him in, that would have been it. In this way, our mothers and grandmothers and their mothers before them brought us into being, starting out without Lamaze and painkillers and epidurals, starting out without husbands sometimes, struggling in breathless bedrooms in hot waves of pain, gripping bedclothes and bedposts and the hand of some other woman, encouraging, exhorting, willing them, willing us to come through, red-faced and gasping to the other side. Okay, this poem is all for all you poets out there. Writing poetry. It's not like sorting socks or making a cake, or even, though that is pretty, setting the laundry to flutter in little flags out back. It's more like taking your broom outside to sweep the sidewalk. You mop, you stop and pick up a piece of glass, and it turns into a memory from 1959. It glitters at you, it shines, and you don't think this will happen, but it slices into you, and your blood is hot and ready, and you are alive. So you keep sweeping. Mostly it's just leaves and twigs, stuff that blows in from the street, but once in a while, that glass. Sometimes poetry is lighting like that, isn't it? Okay, let's see. I don't know how am I doing on time. Another one or two? One or two is okay? All right. I'll do two poems. This next poem is it's a poem, a persona poem, and I'm thinking it's written from the point of view of Camille Monet. That is the wife of the famous painter. And I just, in preparation, I just want to show you a picture that Monet painted of her. It's kind of a famous painting. It's called The Woman in the Green Dress. So this is from her point of view. Life with the famous painter Camille Danseau Monet, 1847 to 1879. I put on my green dress and he painted me. Sat with Bazille and Courbet for the picnic in the wood. That was nothing. That was just time, looking pretty and pensive, staring off into the distance at what was coming. There was our home in Argenteuil with a garden. I love that. And he painted me with roses all around, sweet peas and cups of tea, little Jean not toddling about. He could have married me sooner. I'd have liked that. And when sickness came and Alice moved in to help, he could have looked the other way. He didn't mean me harm. He was just a man, as people like to say, with a man's needs. My life, he never knew. The secret dreaming when he was off in the fields with his easel or trudging away to paint the steam rising from those dratted trains. Always that light he was after, while I was after something I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was just someone to know me, the way he seemed to know the dusk, the sea, the shadows on the water, the way they changed and the way they stayed the same. So maybe that was what it was like for her. She died at the age of 32. She was a model for him, and they went through many hardships. And for the last poem, I'm going to read The Thing About Love. The Thing About Love. It's a nice idea, my friend says, but you can't varnish a piano with it. And she's right, though I've tried a time or two, spreading it on thick with a bristle brush or a cosmetic brush, or perhaps with a spatula, flipping it over like a fried egg and letting it sizzle. Maybe it's an off-brand, you think, or paint and not varnish, not the real thing at all. Yet you spread it on. And that piano, it doesn't make music anymore. What you need is something you can depend on, like the earth in its orbit, darkness that comes with each revolution, and then the light. Maybe that's a kind of religion. Still, I believe in love and in pianos, music that comes to you from who knows where, walking on a summer night. There are birds that walk the ground, striding out like stalwart men, one foot after another, and birds on trees that walk head first upside down and live their whole lives like that, perfectly content. Thank you very much.
What a wonderful, wonderful reading from Lucy Adkins. And congratulations on that chapter, Two-Tone Dress. Wow, it's phenomenal. And I hope to come to Lincoln and get you to sign a copy for me sometime when that can happen.
Absolutely.
sooner,
Absolutely.
sooner than later, I hope. And we can meet up at the mill and have a coffee.
Great. Great.
Thank you and congratulations again.
Thank you.
Well, our next reader is also joining us from the Midwest of the United States. Ellen Stone has taught special education in Kansas and Michigan for over 30 years. She advises a poetry club at Community High School and co-hosts a monthly poetry series where she lives with her family in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Ellen is the author of What is in the Blood from Mayapple Press 2020 and The Solid Living World from Michigan Writers Cooperative Press 2013. Her poetry has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and Best of the Net. Would you please join me in welcoming Ellen Stone?
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to show you the copy of my book because it's this beautiful painting that a friend of mine did. It's actually of a pole barn in Ypsilanti, Michigan. So I thought it was perfect. And Lucy, thank you for setting the table because my poems are also largely about a rural setting. So I want to thank Sandy and Cultivating Voices for the generosity of hosting this reading. And I picked poems today that have spring in them. My book is, it's largely a memoir in a way, and it's about what it takes for a family to cope with mental illness, but it really is also about the glory of living close to the earth. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania on a hill above the north branch of the Susquehanna River. My mom grew up in Boston on Revere Beach, and the life that she signed up for with my dad was a bit of a shock at times. For example, the cow manure spread on the fields surrounding our house, especially in spring. In the first poem I'm going to read, just a note, Marblehead, for those of you who don't know the Northeast coast, is a town north of Boston on the Atlantic Ocean, and its neck is a jut of land where my Aunt Paula, my mom's sister, says all the rich people live. And this poem came from a prompt that I wrote, that I gave the kids in Poetry Club, where you had to pick an object out of a basket, a solid object, and you also picked a postcard and you had to make a poem to make those two go together. Laundry. My mother thinks of Marblehead, its neck stretching toward the well-to-do, a salmon sky rising above the marshes like saltwater taffy strands or Easter banners all the sweet summer long. Instead, she has this line of laundry, flipping cotton t-shirts on a crisp rig reeled over the farmer's corn. In her hand tumbles a horse chestnut, smooth and knobby as her veins. Mom's future is planted in the valleys and hills of our front yard, steady as the laundry she sends out to the manure-scented air. Her sails, spring sewing, calico flower dresses, a navy shift. She twitches and yanks the rubber-coated wire. It hums and grates against the wheel, sending a metallic wheeze into open sky, taking the laundry out to sea. She brings in a basket of wind-stiff handkerchiefs. I'm going to read a baseball poem for you now. And in my family, baseball is pretty close to religion. So this is called Where We Learn to Play Ball. After Dad sipped his whiskey and the old men smoked and laughed, and the shuffleboard disc whispered down the waxed table, and the Friday night fish special was announced, and we ate like ravenous foxes, Mom gathered and herded us out into the black walnut air. The pink windmill glowed behind us, luminous in the parking lot lights, swarming with spring river bugs. We found the ball field and felt the bases rise up like little stages under our damp sneakers. Mom wound up on the pitcher's mound, tight as Tom Seaver, announcing her sequence. Imaginary balls looped toward us in the batter's box. Fat curves, sly knuckleballs, sinkers. We squinted in the dusk settling down and pounded out pretend hits, rounding bases, thin arms pumping. Played the field like raging pirates, running down flies, scooping grounders. Mom in her summer shift and thin flats. We in shorts and rumpled t-shirts, believing in this world of more than a small chance, this dark, soft glory of what could be. Our new bones lifted without wings, a moist sky, the safety of her sphere, rising, rising, the invisible fly ball, airborne in the dark, pinpricked. My parents' hands. I saw the way she pushed them, flickering like river, into the mound, turning what was almost weightless into substance, Flower of air, pinch of sea, sludge of yeast she drained, slight foam from the narrow bowl, hard plane of her wide palm, pressing the counter, leaning with her urgent weight, making something alive that was static. The way her brain flew, fingers turning dough into baby, white dusting cabinets, floor, her face, a studied countenance of care. The manner in which he held a hoe as if it were a loved thing, what can be leaned or relied on, his intention sharp as a pine's outline on the ridge over the dark swamp, then swung it, swift cuts into dirt, precise, methodical as a church bell, but sharp enough to kill a helpless small thing. How he let me help hammer iron stakes, string line to make the rows. His hands that raised the sledge above our heads and released it over and over. How I thought life would always be like this, measured, even in cruelty, even in death. When I was about 10 years old, my mother had a nervous breakdown, which they called in those days. And she later was diagnosed with manic depressive disorder, now known as bipolar disorder. This is called Easter Sunday dresses. Hemmed on the couch before church, ragged seams, bodice spread tightly into curve, calico blooming on the ironing board, manure spread over muddy cornfields, hyacinths jut from near the woodshed garden. When we were young, Dad said the rabbit lived there. Red-winged blackbirds call from the back ravine. The bell will ring soon, pealing over the hill. All those people who say they are Christians watch us walk in. Will they wonder where she is? Our mother, home in bed, still wintering. We sit in Granny's pew, flowers spread over our laps. What mysteries you show us, Jesus, disappearing acts, such odd forgiveness. While here we are tucked in a quiet cloth bouquet, no miracles in sight. The Psychiatrist Talks to the Family, 1968. He handed us a tin of cherry candies, all dusted, white and sour as the spring. We sat like little starlings on a fence rail and popped them in our mouths while gathering the words he floated through the dust motes that disappeared like small balloons into the air. We squirmed and yawned like drowsy barn cats while the doctor murmured, smoothed his hair. Though we were silent, shut, our small bodies sprung jagged cracks where all the sweet leaked out. Our mom would not be coming home with us. We were young in a world of holes and doubt. Whatever else occurred, I don't remember, just the tin of cherry sweets he offered us, unlike the cherry tree we'd all return to, eaten by the birds, smattered with rust. Rhubarb. Just below the apple tree, skirt of billow spray, rhubarb erupts. Lipstick stems like sex, what we know of it, dogs in heat, the sudden throb from males we keep separate and caged. Green poisoned leaves, like crumpled ears of elephants shook out when circus folks ride them round dirt circles. We snap the stalks and hold parades on our moss carpets. Sugar snuck from Granny, suck the sour ends. Oh, rhubarb, how we know we love you when your pucker twists our mouths enough to turn into a kind of dare. Wonder what kills someone, which mistakes cannot be taken back. Now Granny's dead, and mother brings the grocery confection, neon colors and non-dairy frosting, numb the tongue into some kind of nothing. Where's the rhubarb cake? Spring with all her sharpness, spade forked, just as raw as cow shit spread on fields. The smell I miss when April turns to May and rhubarb tastes like home, bittersweet with sorrow. I'm just going to read two poems from the second half of my book, which focuses on my care of my mom as she aged, and then I have a new poem at the end. This poem references my mother's kidney transplant after years of taking lithium. And this actually happened in Ann Arbor, so it's sort of a shout out to the University of Michigan Hospital, because my mom was one of the oldest kidney transplants. I think she was in her 70s. Good Friday in the transplant clinic. We sit compliant. A stream of names float in the air. Matthew, Florence, David. Mother goes to blood draw across the busy hallway. Now the wheelchair-bound line up. The most fragile of the mobile wearing masks shuffle their walkers. Almost sprightly at 74, mom glows. Her new life with a child's kidney. An hour's wait is nothing. Does a child's spirit exist separate from the body? Did she rise up like Jesus on that day we got the call saying there was a kidney? Her soul hovering above the cooler, curious. The lines are long. My arms feel hollow. I want to call out to her, little girl who saved my mother. Find a flight to Oklahoma to guide the living through their long walk. My mother's blood courses, looping gently through her circular riverbed of veins. I sit nearby, waiting, watching for any sign of redemption. I should have mentioned my mother was on a transplant list for a long time, but she ended up getting a cadaver kidney. Today is the Sabbath of medicine. We have gathered all the little pill bottles in the sanctuary of the kitchen table, lined them up like good parishioners. Together, we tell them when it is their turn. You hold the list and can't pronounce the names quite like you used to. I find myself correcting. We count the number and the milligrams, cross-checking one another. This is our daily bread now, the plastic box, its tidy slots where each one rests, the white, the pink, the blue. We are thankful we have enough. Glad Walmart pharmacy provides, that the refills have arrived. Cardiology, transplant, psychiatry, anticoagulation, the latest of the clinics. We are practicing gratitude in the belly of America on this day of rest. You live here in your wheelchair now. Your 18 meds keep you alive. You still have your Medicare and Medicaid, my prayers and curses floating like fluff out the subsidized apartment window. Norway maple flowers junking asphalt with hard green buds, new lilac blooming, somehow smelling like bereavement or grace. I cannot tell the difference. And I have one last poem that I wrote last week. I feel like my job right now, I'm retired and I have an old dog and I have my mom and then my house and my husband, but this poem sort of encapsulates my life right now. So thank you so much for listening. This is called God of Dogs. After my summoning, snatch of dream at dawn, mound of towels from the bath, dog rubbed down as vigorous as before, but beneath my hands, she shrank almost to puppyhood, diminished but whole. Why I could not rejoice she was with me still. My mind focused on loss, panicked as if my movements would make her disappear. How do you prepare for grief? I want to ask the God of dogs. How to open myself to that still reef and not fall in. Blade my hands through this water's slow churn. Boat on the river and the water's down, Dad says. It's low, the current so still we are barely moving, yet stuck. There we are, the yellow sky of not yet spring. Mom, near 90, sits in the shower, crows like a nestling when she is ready for the soap, the wash rag, time to suds her hair, time to smooth it. Her mouth open for the worm, and me, mama bird, busy on the wing, scooping bugs or fluff, what to feed her, what to keep the nest, place of landing, soft. Here, the old dog naps on her thick pad, her narrow head, frosted muzzle right between her paws. It is the rest I crave, for her, for Mom when lunch is ending. I say time for a nap, setting the radio to a slow jazz drawl, flicking off the light. Her hair damp from my toweling after the shower, wanting to tuck her in, adjust the blanket on the couch. Murmur some short prayer or story, maybe of spring, the dogs giving birth, all the puppies, finding them in the coop, that sharp peak of joy, their newness, waxy, wet, fresh, foul beginning in the vast, rough world. How I'll hold your hand to watch you until you go to sleep. Thanks so much, everybody.
Wow. Thank you so much, Ellen. And, I think that I get lost sometimes about where I've learned of everyone's books but I have, and so I may be like delusion. I may not have the story right now, but I have a memory of reading the poem "The Psychiatrist Talks to the Family," and if I'm making this all up, I feel like I read it like if it was on Swim every day or something, and also I felt so attracted to the title of your book. And what I really appreciated, so whether any of these things are true, doesn't.
You told me, I sent the book to you and you said that you opened it up and the psychiatrist poem was the first one you read.
Okay, that's it. All right, there it is. But then I'm imagining like it was in Swim. But yes, I mean, I love that poem so much, and I marvel at that poem. So to hear it, like I'm so grateful. And so what I really also appreciate is I never know that this is what's going to happen. I always hope this is what's going to happen. I'm always looking for like this alchemy. And what I watched was, here is Lucy reading her wonderful poems, and she threads the needle and it goes right through into your reading. And I just felt that thread pull through. And I know a little bit about what's coming next, and so I'm looking forward to the continuation of the stitches. So thank you so much for that beautiful reading, and congratulations. I cannot wait to reunite with the book, because it's not here in Connecticut with me. It's out in the West Coast. So in a few weeks, I'll be able to open right back up to that poem and have a memory of today, which I cherish. So thank you. And Lucy, I'll be reuniting with your book as well, because I told you it's in my office to get to college. Well, here we take we take that needle and thread across the pond, as we like to say, over to County Tipperary, and to hear from Michael Durack, who I have the pleasure of seeing in readings that I go to often, and I just love his work and his presence when he's reading. Those of you who have had the pleasure to hear him read know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, you are in for quite a lovely 15 minutes. So without further ado, here is the bio for Michael Durack. Michael Durack lives in County Tipperary, Ireland. His work features in journals such as The Blue Nib, The Honest Ulsterman, Skylight 47, The Cafe Review, and Poetry Ireland Review, as well as airing on many local and national radio programs. His publications include a memoir in prose and poems, Saved to Memory, Lost to View, 2016, and two poetry collections, Where It Began from 2017 and Flip Sides, his newest collection from 2020, all from Revival Press, out of one of my favorite places in all of the world, Limerick, Ireland. Please welcome Michael Durack.
Thank you, and thank you, Sandy, and thanks to Don and Elizabeth Ann for providing this wonderful forum for writers and poets in difficult times. I'm going to read a selection of poems from my most recent collection, which is Flip Sides. It has a colourful cover designed by my daughter, Ruth Durack. I'm very happy with it. And I'll read some poems from that, and maybe I'll finish with a few newer poems written since the launch of Flip Sides. So as Rodgers and Hammerstein might say, let's start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. The first poem in Flip Sides is called The Sun Still Rises. Before the age of science and reason, before the Enlightenment, there was light. Before astronomy and astrophysics mapped the flight path of the planets, the sun came up and the sun went down. Before optics and prismatics, the firmament was arched with gold-bearing rainbow. Before the lighthouse and the Fresnel lens, beacons steered our mariners safely home. Before the long eye of the Galilean telescope, the northern sky was ploughed by silver stars. Electric light now seeks out dusty corners. Our fairies, scattered to the four strong winds, taper and lantern, torch and flambeau, give way to floodlight, flashbulb, neon, strobe. Newspapers divine the spot-on times of sunrise, tides, and sunset. Our screens give notice of the arrival of comets and meteor showers, so that a grandchild spread-eagled on the grass can witness for free a primal fireworks show and wish upon a choice of shooting stars. In our postmodern, heliocentric world, the sun still rises and the sun still sets. And thank you. I hadn't expected to have so much in common with Lucy and Ellen, but I grew up on a small farm in County Tipperary, Ireland, and shared many menial chores with my father. Now, father-son relationships can be fraught at times, but in this poem, the prevailing mood is one of harmony and cooperation. Handiwork. We mended fences, my father and I, during the off-season in the well field. Now, whether good fences made good neighbours or merely kept our cows out of a heron's meadow, it didn't much matter. He stood on a boundary ditch, half sliced angry whitethorns with his billhook, bent them to his will, trained them across gaps. Come night time, his rough hands chafed, infested with splinters and microthorns. He handed me a sewing needle, deferring to my keen eye and sure touch. I eased the needle's point under the skin, probing, pinching, nudging, until I had teased the buggers out. He never flinched. I had his unconditional trust. The barbed wire fences were another thing. The strands of wire stapled to stakes he cut and shaped and rammed into the earth, using no mallet, but the blunt iron of a heavy crowbar. I balanced each paling post between my hands, braced for the impact, praying he'd not miss, knowing he never would. Handiwork of long ago, my frail hands at his mercy, his coarse hands in my care. Thank you. And coming from a rural neck of the woods, one of the great rites of passage was going to the local Cinema Paradiso or flea pit. And my brothers and I made that 4 or 5 mile journey to the local town of Newport by bicycle, initially for the Sunday afternoon matinees, and then later for the more atmospheric night experience. Cowboys. 3 Cooleen cowboys riding the Newport Trail, ditching our bicycles in a black road hedgerow, then striding up Main Street to the square. In Harvey's store, trading pennies for cigarettes singly sold. Slipping into the wood-floored stalls of McCormack's noisy picture hall to go up at Tower and Searchlights, Mountain Peak, at sweating topless gongman, roaring lion. We crossed the Yukon River, followed the Huskies and the Bonanza Gold to the land of the midnight sun with Sam McCord and George Pratt north to Alaska. Or waded through the Burmese jungle, never so few, battling the Japs with Sinatra and Steve McQueen. Or plumbed the Shenandoah Valley to share Elvis's angst with Millie Perkins and Hope Lange, wild in the country. Or cheered on Audie Murphy, hell-bent for leather and for justice, fighting a crooked sheriff, white hat. The end. We stumble into darkness, reclaim our bikes. One flash beam and some random flickers guide us down Boher Ord, gunfire still crackling in our ears. Home, under Tugnacawn Hill, the house asleep, dogs in their den, dreaming of sledges and snow. Cattle warm in the sheds, the searchlights out. And my next one is a very short meditation, I suppose, on the theme of mortality. It's called Snowman. Begotten of joy and white crystals, the squat snowman abides the thaw, inscrutable to his sorry end as the lawn turns to green. By dawn, the weather kites have munched the body whole, but spat his woolen scarf, his coal eyes, and his carrot nose. We turn from the window and tread with circumspection, fearful of the enemies that encircle us unseen, and those fifth column malignancies, the moles that undermine us deep within. Thank you. I've been a sports fan all my life, not baseball, I suppose, more Gaelic games, hurling, football, and rugby and soccer. But I love it for the spectacle and the thrills, but I also find sport offers some very useful metaphors for life. And in this poem, I am using some tennis metaphors to represent the ups and downs of a marriage. Double fault. They married in July, Wimbledon on TV, sunshine, starched whites, strawberries and cream. You take him for a bronzed superstar, her for a centre court darling. Bouquets and confetti on a special day not meant to last. Ahead, a glamourless grind of endless tetchy rallies, cut and thrust, nip and tuck, hammer and tongs, hot tongue and cold shoulder. Advantage him, deuce, advantage her. For one unblemished day, flowers and finery camouflaged a double fault, and snazzy shoes belied a truth, the feet they wore of Roland Garros clay. Thank you. The next poem is for one of my oldest friends. We were classmates at secondary school or high school, and flatmates in college, and colleagues for most of our working lives as teachers. And this poem recalls an end of term during our university days. Reach Out for Danny Grace. On the final night of Trinity term, we raised a glass or three in Cassidy's of Camden Street, imbibing not too wisely and not well. Later, in our flat on Rathmines Road, I strummed raucous chords from my first cheap guitar. Next day, with bag and baggage, I hit out for home, and you boarded a student flight for JFK. The letters, with their sprawling hieroglyphics, came edged in blue and red. I relished those tales of an Irish cook in a wildwood diner, and how once, pacing the Jersey shore after a late shift, your ears picked out familiar strains from an entertainment hub. The Four Tops pounding their irresistible Motown beat. And I wished I could reach out and be there. Thank you. I'll read one more poem from Flipsides and then maybe a couple of short newer poems. Barges mean different things to different people. I have some friends whose fathers came to live in my locality as a result of their work on the inland navigation as bargemen. So this poem is for them. And in the poem, I start with a romantic image of barges from a poem, and I finish on a visionary note, and in between, focus on the nitty-gritty of barges as a commercial activity with plenty of hard work and danger. Barges. The poet from his seat near Baggot Street Bridge observed a barge bringing mythologies. Managers of the Grand Canal Company oversaw boats and boatmen ferrying cargoes of asbestos from Athy, sugar beet for Carlow, firkins of porter from St. James's Gate to Limerick and other far-flung towns. Deckers, engine men and greasers with quick wits and jazzy nicknames, Gorky Man Anderson and Bishop Whelan, Lamb Conlon and Tom the Guy, B and I Dunn and Joni Judge, Cape Town Maher and Lucky Roach, Bogeyman Kelly and Banagher Jack, grew acquainted with long days and short pay, absences from family, bugs, blow lamps, hot bulb engines, backfire, black smoke, pearls of flywheels, stop ropes, lake swells, and hauntings at Lanesborough and the 13th Loch. Children on Killaloo's trendy boardwalk turn towards the pierhead and Loch Derg, and look, barges are chugging downstream from Kildare and Inchicore, crewed by forefathers bearing their names: Conroy, Kennedy, Nolan, O'Donoghue, Lawler, Bowers. Thank you. And if I have time for two short poems from more recently, just to prove that I haven't been in hibernation since the launch of Flipsides. I was working on a poem set in Russia, recalling a trip there back in 1991, just before the end of the Soviet Union. And I had included Novodevichy Convent, where, among others, Gorky and Chekhov and Prokofiev are buried. And doing some checks on Prokofiev, I discovered an interesting coincidence, and that gave rise to this poem, Angel of Death. Moscow, 1953, the 5th of March. The Angel of Death paid 2 house calls, the names of Stalin and Prokofiev in his book. In the House of Unions, the agent of the Great Terror reposed. The morning begot such mass, such urgency, the angel swooped and reaped 100 more. Amid the chaos, the maker of music was manhandled through back streets against the human tide. At his funeral, there were 30 souls, 1 for each piano, violin, and cello concerto, his every ballet, opera, symphony. And thank you. I'll finish with a poem for about the plight of poets operating in difficult times like we've had for the last year. It's in the form of a pantoum, and it's called Subversives. Subversives driven underground, each in his, each in her private room. We fashion poems from shape and sound and share them through the power of Zoom. Each in her, each in his private room, cajoling favors from the muse. We share them through the power of Zoom. We stand in other poets' shoes. Cajoling favors from the muse is something easier said than done. We stand in other poets' shoes. We fight the battles that they won. It's something easier said than done, this work of rhyming minstrelsy. We fight the battles that they won. We partake of their mystery. This work of rhyming minstrelsy, fashioning poems from shape and sound, we partake of the mystery, subversives driven underground. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michael Durack. And I, again, congratulations on Flipsides. I know it's a little, it feels like it's been a while, but the way that I define new book showcases, around within a year of the reading, and it's been so important to showcase those folks whose books came out during the pandemic, which is certainly true of what your experience was. And I also want to just mention how much I really appreciate in your work, your connection with a lot of American popular culture. You know, so when I've heard you read, my ears can prick up pretty quickly because I recognize things that you're talking about, and as well as the love of sport. So I knew that thread was going to get pulled through from the baseball poems. Edward O'Dwyer, whom I know you know, has promised that the next time he's going to take me to a hurling match. So I'm looking forward to that indeed.
I'll join you afterwards.
Oh,
for a
please
few
do.
drinks,
Yeah,
Cynthia.
indeed. We could go to the copper room and have a treaty ale. Thank you so much. And again, I'm really amazed by the constellation of your interests in poetry, like what emerges and manifests through the range of everything that you write about. And again, it's always a pleasure to see you at the different venues. And folks, if there's a couple weeks left of Not the Time to Be Silent, which I know is a reading series that that Michael frequents, an open mic, a truly remarkable thing. And so we'll look forward to seeing you around Zoom more. Well, we move to our final reader of the day, a person that I met in person just a little over a year ago at AWP, one of, as I like to say, my Salmon siblings. And I have such nostalgia for that time that we all spent together in San Antonio, being literally the last time I was at a poetry reading in person. And I got to meet Sandra Ann Winters and hear her read from her remarkable book that was being launched just a year ago. And that's how I define that's how a new book showcase works. If your book has come out from within a year of your reading, you're in the new book showcase. And so it is a true pleasure. I loved her book. I loved her reading. She's going to show you the cover of her book, and I have a penchant for glass objects, and I love that cover of her book, Do Not Touch. Brilliant title for a really brilliant collection. Well, here is the formal bio for our final reader today in our new book showcase. Sandra Ann Winters has published 2 collections from Salmon Poetry, Do Not Touch and The Place Where I Left You. Her poems have appeared in journals and anthologies, including the Cork Literary Review, Southward, the North Carolina Literary Review, Flying South, even the Daybreak, 35 years of Salmon poetry. If you want to get an incredible range of Salmon's groundbreaking poetry over the years, that's a fabulous introduction to the poetry of contemporary Irish poetry and American poetry through Salmon poetry. She is the winner of the 2011 Gregory O'Donoghue International Poetry Competition, and that is a quite prestigious award across the pond. I happen to know that, and has been a Pushcart nominee twice and received a commendation for the 2019 Yeats Poetry Prize. She was a professor of Irish and English literature for 30 years at Guilford College in Greensboro, North Carolina. Would you please welcome Sandra Ann Winters? You just need to unmute. No worries.
The book, the title is Do Not Touch. And the meanings would be, well, this is an antiquity. And of course, in a museum, there would be a sign that says, do not touch. It is also about a love affair where they do touch. Now, it does not mean do not touch the book. I do want you to touch the book. So I've had it on tables and folks have gone, well, it says do not touch. So, oh, there are two sections, a section of a love affair and a section for family and friends. And I just saw where some of my Irish friends came in. So I'm going to read specifically poems that for them that were written for those two people, or it's a group of people. You will notice that the man who starts the first poem does touch everything in the museum. Do not touch. You ran your fingers around the stones of the ice house that stored salmon caught in the black water. You pulled the Mount Fija to your face, smelled the blossoms. In Kilkenny Castle, you brushed your hands over the antique table, pressed the silk wallpaper, a rich embossed green, picked up a silver knife from the place setting, felt its heft. Hands on the glass cabinet as if you could reach into the past, you studied a photo. Gosh, isn't that amazing, you said. In St. Canice's Cathedral, you traced the circle of medieval font, dipped your hands in the holy water, stroked the marble effigy of Margaret Butler, caressed her closed eyes, her cheeks, her hair, a slight smile on her lips, as if she were your lover, in her hands folded in prayer. And then you touched me. Our Irish garden, my husband and I owned a house in Ireland for many, many years, and we had a garden which we tended. Oh, our Irish garden. You weed the garden, the microcosm, shelter the magenta hydrangea blossoms, weave wisteria through the trellis, the fragrant vine always zealous. Clip the bay laurel to save the blueberries. You gather crab apples to make jellies. Prune the rosemary to garnish the lamb. Cut the sage to cook with marjoram. Gather the nasturtiums for salads. Trim the heather, save a chrysalis. In the moist soil, the slugs take their chances. When you fertilize manure and ashes, you comfort me against the setting sun. My seedsman, you blow a kiss on the run. Thank you. Enough said. Under the leafy branches, spoonfuls of light, we said enough to make you want to stay the afternoon. Your feet touched my red painted toes to my delight. Your hands covered my breast under the sun. The tangle of our legs made me spin and spin. I stroked your spine with my palms, nothing we had planned. The birds in the shadows witnessed not our sin, but our grassy bed and how the oak spans. Our love was hot. We pulled apart, smiled. We were not in a hurry, but old and wild. And this poem is for friends who are listening. And I wish I were there. Roaring Water Bay. He roasts peppers until tender, pours hot water over the red bells, plunges them into a cooling rinse. Skins slip off, seeds flake to the bowl beneath become supper. Outside, the island's rugged pulse beats against the rocks, not tender at all, but necessary. Sills sing in the roiling water. The willow fence woven with roses arches firm to the cliff. He serves the soup. The sea is pure horizon. And then another one for a friend who's listening. I never read these out loud at a reading. This is a poem from a mother. It's in her mother's voice to a daughter who's an adult. So it's from the mother's voice, and it's for Deirdre. Deirdre, I sat on my nursing home bed in my gray wool vest, legs swollen, stretched out like two plump courgettes. You poured champagne into Waterford crystal. I toasted a slancha. You came to me with bags full of books, big print mysteries from the Canturk Library. You told me, daughter, about your days, gathering frog spawn for the children, to watch fat specks burst into tadpoles, and about climbing Carabana with your friends, sharing hot parsnip soup on the peak. You folded my new slim wheelchair, brought me out for lamb and roast potatoes, a linen tablecloth. Some days I want to rock you in my arms, your eyes red. I knew you had to gather up the horizon and move it once again. You lifted a straw to my mouth, a little bird chirping for a drop, a water offering prayer. I waited through the wind, the rain, the sun, through the rhythm of my days. I waited for your blue eyes. Is it time for me to read one more, or should I? One more, okay. This is this one tells a lot about me, which I probably shouldn't read, about my growing up. Under the moon. My daddy built the out-of-house for us, whitewashed the walls, cut a star in the door. He pasted the poem Cremation of Sam McGee on the wall. Studs of candles lay in a cubby, and of course, always a bucket of lime. I could see the moon through the star cutout and knew I was lucky. The night sky falls me to the sleeping porch, where I lay awake in the cooler southern air, that cold, dry globe, studded with craters and strewn with rocks and dust, led me through my periodic rises and falls. I pondered the full, the waning gibbous, the waxing crescent moons. The moon had followed me all my days and nights, sleeping on the hard earth under the Sierra and Utah skies, through nights on the sand dunes by the Atlantic. It has followed me rocking on the glider that stretches out on the screened porch. When I pee to the glinting stars' tune, I know my daddy was the man in the moon. Thank you. And hello to all my friends.
Oh, thank you so much, Sandra Ann Winters. I'm so glad you're able to share your poetry with us and all your friends in the audience here, and for posterity on the recording. They will forever hear you call out to them. What a great way to end our new book showcase today. I want to thank all of our readers. We began with Lucy Adkins, Threading the Needle. We moved on to Ellen Stone, Michael Durack, and we just heard from Sandra Ann Winters. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And of course, thank you to Don Krieger, poet, timekeeper, technical wizard, to Kim Ports Parsons, who's been generously putting links to the chat, links to the books in the chat. I hope those of you who have the resources today will buy at least 1, 2, 4, or many more books to support the poets as well as their presses. And of course, thank you as always to my sister co-founder, Elizabeth Ann. Well, I want to remind you, please join us next week for our World Poetry Day Sunday special. next Sunday is World Poetry Day. We will feature Indran Amirthanayagam, Tanya Ko Hong, Fergus Hogan, Rachel Gomez, and Yuyutsu Sharma. We're going to have poets from Nepal to New Zealand and everywhere in between. Also Carolyn Wright. How could I forget? Carolyn Wright. Oh my gosh. Join us, and we will follow the features with our signature live open mic. 3 minutes, one poem of your own or of a poet you like anywhere in the world, living in person or in memory. And that will be, as usual, 3 o'clock Eastern. Check all your time zones. Our pre-show sign up for the open mic begins at 2:45 Eastern here in the Zoom Poetry Studio. And in 2 weeks, we're back on Sunday, March 28th for another fabulous new book showcase featuring Debbie Bacharach, Attracta Fahy, Michelle Parker Randall, and Ann Tweedy. Ooh, my words are all a jumble today. Sorry, everybody. Well, that's it for tonight, friends. I'll be back next Sunday with you all. I look so forward to bringing you more poetry, literally from around the world, from my little seaside nook here in Old Saybrook, Connecticut. I say to all of you, ahoy, happy Mother's Day, happy St. Patrick's Day coming up this week. Safe travels. And keep writing. There's many, many readings this week that you can attend. And I'll be reading in New York at 7 o'clock. Great reading from Angela Driven and others tomorrow night that I'm aware of. There is also a wonderful reading on Wednesday night in Alaska with the Poetry Parlay group with a tribute to Evan Boland. And Thursday night, you can hear 2 of the poet laureates that read on our Laureate Love Fest, Mary Awishi and Carmen Tafoya. And on Saturday, you can join me in the Collectibles Reading Series, another series that I host. It'll be Julie Marie Ward sharing her work and the work of the amazing, amazing Audre Lorde. You can contact us on Cultivating Voices Live Poetry if you want any information for all those readings. And again, I say to you, ahoy mateys, we'll see you soon on Zoom. Good night.